West Virginia has more ghost stories per square mile than any other state, and most of them are true. At least that's what the locals told me when I started working at Ridgeline Amusement Park. The park was built in the 1960s on land that used to belong to a company town. One of those places where the coal company owned everything and everyone until the mine ran dry and the families just left. But according to the old-timers, not everyone left, and some of the people who stayed aren't exactly people anymore. The carousel horses move on their own sometimes, just slightly, like they're breathing. I've seen it happen during my evening shifts when the park is closed and all the power is supposed to be off. The music box melody starts playing even when the carousel isn't running, echoing through the empty park like a lullaby for children who died decades before the rides were ever built. My supervisor says it's just settling in old machinery, but old machinery doesn't whisper names in languages that sound like they're coming from underground. My name's Caleb Lester, and I ended up in Beckley after my construction job in Charleston fell through. Debt collectors were breathing down my neck, and my cousin Jessa said Ridgeline was hiring night security with no questions asked. The pay was decent enough to keep me afloat while I figured out my next move. What she didn't mention was why they were always hiring, or why the previous 3 security guards had quit within a month. The park sits in a hollow between 2 ridges, surrounded by thick woods that seem to swallow sound. During the day, families come from counties away to ride the Thunderbolt roller coaster and win stuffed animals at the ring toss. But when the sun sets behind those hills and the last car pulls out of the gravel parking lot, Ridgeline becomes something else entirely. I should have paid more attention during my first week when Doyle Hatfield, the maintenance supervisor, handed me a wrinkled piece of paper along with my security radio. "Rules for the night shift," he said, his weathered face serious. "Don't think they're suggestions. Learned that the hard way." The paper was yellowed with age, written in different handwriting styles like multiple people had added to it over the years. Some entries were in faded blue ink, others in pencil that had been traced over so many times, the words looked carved into the paper. At the bottom, someone had scrawled in red ink, "Remember Corey Mullins." I asked Doyle who Corey Mullins was. He looked at me for a long moment, then walked away without answering. Later, I learned from Jessa that Corey had been a security guard here 2 years ago. They found his uniform folded neatly on the carousel platform one morning, but never found Corey. The state police ruled it a missing person case, but everyone in town knew better. Now, 6 weeks into this job, I understand why that paper exists. I've added my own entries in black ink, and I pray nobody else will have to add theirs. But if you're reading this, someone probably will. The rules aren't just guidelines. They're the only thing standing between you and becoming another Beckley ghost story. My first real night alone at Ridgeline started like any other shift. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my radio and flashlight from the security office, and watched the last maintenance crew head home in their pickup trucks. The parking lot emptied except for my beat-up Ford Ranger, looking small and vulnerable under the single working streetlight. Doyle had left the rules paper on my desk, with a thermos of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. The paper crinkled as I unfolded it, and I read through the list one more time, hoping it would make more sense than it had during training. Ridgeline Night Security Protocols. Rule 1. Never enter the fun house alone between midnight and 3 a.m. If you hear carnival music coming from inside during these hours, turn your radio to static and walk away. Rule 2. The carousel will start playing music on its own exactly 3 times each night. Count them. If it plays a 4th time, evacuate the park immediately. Rule 3. Check the Thunderbolt roller coaster every hour, but do not ride the maintenance lift after 2 a.m. If you see someone in the front car of a stationary train, pretend you don't see them. Rule 4. The concession stand freezers will open by themselves. Close them and continue your rounds. Do not look inside when this happens. Rule 5. If children's laughter echoes from the playground after closing, do not investigate. The playground equipment was removed in 1987. I folded the paper and tucked it into my shirt pocket, next to my Marlboros. The coffee tasted like burnt dirt, but it was hot and caffeinated, which was all that mattered for a 12-hour shift. The first few hours passed quietly. I made my rounds through the midway, flashlight beams sweeping across game booths draped in canvas tarps. The duck pond shooting gallery looked particularly eerie in the dark, its mechanical ducks frozen mid-waddle like some kind of waterfowl cemetery. My footsteps echoed hollow on the wooden walkways, and somewhere in the distance, a loose piece of metal siding tapped against a building in the mountain breeze. At 11:47 p.m., I was checking the locks on the gift shop when the carousel music started. The melody drifted across the park, tinny and distant, playing The Entertainer at half speed. I pulled out my phone and marked the time. First music of the night. The tune played for exactly 90 seconds before cutting off mid-note, leaving behind a silence that felt thicker than before. I continued my rounds, checking the Thunderbolt's safety barriers and testing door handles. Everything seemed secure until I reached the concession area near the back of the park. The slush puppy machine hummed quietly, and the popcorn warmers were dark. But the freezer at the far end of the counter stood wide open, its interior light casting a blue glow across the floor. Following Rule 4, I approached without looking inside and pushed the heavy door closed. The magnetic seal made a soft thump as it engaged. I marked the time again, 12:23 a.m. 20 minutes later, I was near the ticket booths when the carousel played its second song of the night. This time it was Beautiful Dreamer, the notes echoing off the surrounding hills like a music box left open in a tomb. I wrote down 12:43 a.m. and kept walking. The funhouse loomed ahead of me, its painted facade depicting clowns and mirrors that seemed to shift in my peripheral vision. According to Rule 1, I had 17 minutes before the midnight to 3 a.m. danger zone began. The entrance was secured with a padlock and chain, same as always, but as I turned to leave, I could swear I heard something moving inside. Footsteps on wooden floors, maybe, or the creak of mechanical props settling. I checked my watch, 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes early, but close enough to make me nervous. I walked away from the funhouse, radio clipped to my belt, and headed toward the Thunderbolt for my first official night check. The roller coaster's steel framework rose into the darkness like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast, and the maintenance lift swayed slightly in the wind. As I climbed the operator's platform to check the control panel, the carousel music started again. Third time, 12:09 a.m. Right on schedule. I made a note and tried to ignore the way the melody seemed to follow me, even after the music stopped. 2 more music sessions would mean evacuation. But 3 was normal, according to the rules. 3 was safe. I just had to make it through the next 10 hours without hearing a 4th song. Midnight hit like a door slamming shut. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant, and the mountain wind picked up, rattling the game booth awnings and sending empty soda cups skittering across the midway. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked my watch. 12:02 a.m. The funhouse danger zone had officially begun. I was making my way toward the Thunderbolt for the hourly check when I heard it, carnival music drifting from the direction of the funhouse. Not the carousel this time. This was different. Organ music. The kind that belongs to vintage carnival rides, playing a waltz that sounded like it was being fed through an old gramophone. According to Rule 1, I should turn my radio to static and walk away. I reached for the radio on my belt, fingers fumbling with the dial until white noise filled the air. The static seemed to create a bubble around me, muffling the organ music until it became just another sound in the mountain night. But as I walked away from the fun house, I made the mistake of glancing back. The padlock was still in place. The chain still secured the entrance. But through the gap beneath the door, I could see colored lights flickering, red, blue, yellow, like the funhouse was operating at full capacity with invisible customers. I forced myself to keep walking, radio static buzzing in my ear like angry wasps. The thunderbolt loomed ahead, its tracks disappearing into darkness above the tree line. I climbed the operator's platform and ran through my checklist. Brake systems engaged, safety barriers secure, no obvious damage to the track supports. Everything looked normal until I reached the station platform where passengers would board. The lead car of the roller coaster train sat empty at the loading zone, its safety harness dangling open. But there was something wrong with the seat cushion, an indentation, like someone had been sitting there recently. The vinyl was still warm to the touch. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the entire train. Empty seats, all of them, but each one showed that same depression in the cushioning, like the train had just finished a full ride with passengers who had simply vanished when it returned to the station. My radio crackled with static, then cleared for a moment. Through the white noise, I heard what sounded like children giggling, distant and echo-distorted. Then the static returned, washing away the sound. I marked the time in my notebook, 12:31 a.m. First thunderbolt check complete. No visible passengers in stationary train, as mentioned in Rule 3. The indentations in the seats didn't count as passengers, I told myself. The rule was specific. If you see someone, pretend you don't see them. I hadn't seen anyone. The walk back toward the midway took me past the old playground area. According to park history, this section used to have swings and a small slide until some kind of accident in 1987. Now it was just an empty patch of grass surrounded by mature oak trees. But as I passed the chain-link fence that marked the boundary, laughter. Children's laughter, bright and carefree, coming from the empty grass where no playground had existed for over 30 years. Rule 5 was crystal clear. Do not investigate. But the sound was so vivid, so real, that I found myself stopping despite every rational thought in my head. The laughter continued, punctuated by the creak of swing chains and the metallic scrape of a slide. I could almost see them, ghost children playing on ghost equipment, their joy echoing across decades. Hi everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The radio static helped again, creating white noise that made the phantom playground sounds fade to whispers. I kept walking, but the laughter followed me for almost a quarter mile before finally dissolving into the mountain air. By 1:15 a.m., I had reached the concession area again. The slush puppy machine was still humming, but the freezer door hung open once more. This was the second time tonight, which wasn't mentioned in the rules. Did that mean it was normal, or was something escalating? I approached the freezer without looking inside, same as before, and pushed the door closed. But this time, just before the magnetic seal engaged, I caught a whiff of something that made my stomach lurch. Not the smell of frozen treats or ice. Something organic and wrong, like meat that had been left in a hot car for days. The door clicked shut, sealing away whatever was producing that odor. I marked the time and moved on, trying to convince myself that old freezers sometimes smelled strange when their seals wore out. At 1:42 a.m., I was checking the duck pond shooting gallery when the fourth carousel song began. The melody was Rockabye Baby, played at a tempo so slow it sounded like a funeral dirge. I stopped dead in my tracks, pen poised over my notebook. This was song number 4. According to Rule 2, I should evacuate the park immediately. But my keys were in the security office. My truck was in the parking lot on the other side of the park, and between me and the exit, I would have to pass the funhouse, which was still playing its own ghostly carnival music beneath the white noise of my radio. The carousel melody continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I looked around the midway, half expecting to see something different, some sign that the fourth song had changed the rules of the game. Everything looked the same. The game booths, the prize wheels, the ticket redemption counter, all exactly as they had been moments before. But the air felt different somehow, thicker and more expectant, like the park itself was holding its breath. I pulled out my phone to call Doyle, then remembered he'd warned me the cell towers in this hollow were unreliable after midnight. The screen showed no signal, just an empty network bar that might as well have been laughing at me. The evacuation protocol was clear, but getting out was proving more complicated than the rules had anticipated. I had to cross the entire park to reach my truck, and I was starting to understand why the previous security guards had quit. Some rules were easier to follow than others. The fourth carousel song had changed everything. I could feel it in the way the mountain wind suddenly died, leaving the park wrapped in an oppressive stillness that made my ears ring. Even the radio static seemed muted, like the white noise was struggling against some unseen force that wanted the night to be silent. I needed to get to the security office, grab my keys, and get the hell out of Ridgeline. The evacuation protocol was clear, even if following it meant abandoning my post and probably my job. But as I started walking toward the front of the park, I realized the layout had become confusing in ways that defied logic. The midway path that should have led directly to the ticket booths now curved left toward the Thunderbolt. When I tried to cut through between game booths, I found myself facing a chain-link fence that I was certain hadn't been there during my earlier rounds. The duck pond shooting gallery, which had been on my right just minutes ago, was now somehow on my left. It was like the park was rearranging itself, creating a maze where none had existed before. I pulled out my flashlight and tried to orient myself using the roller coaster as a landmark. The Thunderbolt's highest point should be visible from anywhere in the park, but when I looked up, I saw only darkness. The steel framework that had been silhouetted against the sky earlier had simply vanished into a black void that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam. The radio on my belt crackled, and for a moment the static cleared enough for me to hear a voice. Not the children's laughter from before, but something deeper, speaking in what sounded like the old mountain dialect my grandmother used to slip into when she was telling stories about the coal mines. "Caleb Lester," the voice said, pronouncing my name like it was reading from a list. "You're late for your appointment." I spun the radio dial back to pure static, but the damage was done. Something in the park knew who I was, and it had been expecting me. The path finally straightened out, near what should have been the funhouse, but the building I approached didn't match what I remembered from my earlier rounds. The painted facade was different, older, more weathered, depicting not clowns and mirrors but coal miners with lamplit helmets and women in Depression-era dresses. The padlock was gone, and the entrance stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow whatever stepped inside. Carnival music still drifted from within, but now I could hear other sounds mixed with the organ melodies. Pickaxes striking stone, the rumble of mine carts, and voices singing hymns and harmonies that belonged to another century. According to Rule 1, I should turn my radio to static and walk away. But my radio was already static, and the path away from the funhouse led deeper into the park instead of toward the exit. Every direction except forward seemed blocked by shadows that moved like living curtains, swaying without any wind to disturb them. I had no choice but to enter the funhouse. The interior was nothing like the mirror and lights attraction it was supposed to be. Instead, I found myself in a recreation of a company store from the old mining days, complete with wooden shelves lined with canned goods and work boots. The air smelled of coal dust and kerosene, and the floorboards creaked under my feet with the weight of decades. Behind the counter stood a woman in a faded blue dress, her hair pinned up in a style from the 1940s. She was writing in a ledger with a fountain pen, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were the color of underground water. "You need to settle your account, Mr. Lester," she said, her voice carrying the echo of the mine tunnels. "Your family's been carrying a balance since 1952. I tried to speak, but my throat felt full of coal dust. The woman turned the ledger around so I could see the entries, written in the same flowing script I'd seen on old mining company records at the Beckley Exhibition coal mine. Names I recognized from family stories: Lester, Mullins, Hatfield, all with debts that had never been paid, interest compounding across generations. "Your great-grandfather took more than his share," the woman continued, her finger tracing down the columns of figures. "Food for his family when the mine was closed. Tools when the company wasn't looking. A man has to survive, but debts have a way of finding their descendants." The ledger pages began turning by themselves, flipping through decades of transactions until they reached a fresh entry dated today. My name was written at the top of the page in red ink that looked suspiciously wet. "Corey Mullins tried to run," the woman said, closing the ledger with a snap that echoed like a mine shaft collapsing. "But you can't outrun what your family owes. The coal company always collects, one way or another." The funhouse around us began to shift, walls dissolving to reveal mine tunnel entrances that burrowed into darkness. The woman's dress transformed into the gray coveralls of a mine worker, and her face became gaunt with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd spent too many years breathing coal dust. "You can join your cousin in the deep shafts," she said, gesturing toward the tunnels. "Or you can take his place on the surface, keeping watch over what we've buried. But you can't leave. The debt transfers, but it never disappears." I understood now why Corey Mullins had vanished, why his uniform had been found folded on the carousel platform. He hadn't run away. He'd been collected, claimed by the mining company that had owned this land long before Ridgeline Amusement Park was ever built. The woman reached under the counter and produced a folded security uniform, identical to the one I was wearing, but somehow older, more worn. "Your shift starts now," she said. "Forever." But I had one advantage she hadn't counted on. I'd grown up hearing my grandmother's stories about the old mining companies, including the tricks miners used to protect themselves from company ghosts. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small piece of coal I'd been carrying since childhood. A good luck charm my grandmother had given me, taken from the last cart that came out of the Mullins family mine before it was sealed. The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment her form flickered between the store clerk and the mine worker. "That won't protect you forever," she said, but her voice was already fading. "The debt remains." The funhouse began dissolving around me, walls and ceiling melting away like smoke. I found myself standing in the real funhouse entrance, padlock and chain restored, the painted clowns grinning their gaudy grins. But my radio was dead, the static replaced by complete silence, and my flashlight beams seemed weaker than before. I checked my watch, 2:17 a.m. Still in the danger zone, but I was alive and still capable of moving. The security office was 200 yards away, visible through the gap between game booths. My truck waited in the parking lot beyond, a beacon of normal life in a place that was anything but normal. But as I walked toward freedom, I could feel eyes watching from every shadow. The debt might remain, as the woman had said, but I wasn't ready to pay it tonight. I had coal in my pocket and enough sense to know when to run. The only question was whether the park would let me reach my truck, or if the evacuation protocol was just another rule designed to trap the unwary in a game they could never win. The security office looked the same as I'd left it hours ago, but getting there felt like walking through quicksand. Each step required conscious effort, like the ground beneath my feet was trying to pull me back toward the rides and game booths. The piece of coal in my pocket grew warm against my fingers, and I kept it clutched tight as I approached the small building near the front gate. My keys hung on their hook beside the desk, exactly where I'd left them. But when I reached for them, my hand passed through empty air. The keys were there. I could see them, solid and real, but they existed in some space I couldn't quite reach. I tried again, slower this time, concentrating on the simple act of grasping metal. On the third attempt, my fingers closed around the key ring. The metal felt cold enough to burn, but it was solid, real. I pocketed the keys and grabbed my logbook, wanting some record of what had happened tonight. Future security guards needed to know about the fourth carousel song, about the funhouse transformation, about the coal company ghosts. But when I opened the logbook, every page was blank. Not just tonight's entries, everything. Weeks of reports, maintenance notes, incident summaries, all erased, like the park had decided my observations didn't deserve to exist. I left the building and headed for the parking lot, but the familiar path had changed again. Where the main walkway should have led directly to the front gate, I found myself facing the Thunderbolt's loading platform. The roller coaster cars sat empty in the station, but now I could see figures occupying every seat, translucent shapes in mining coveralls and company store dresses, their faces hollow with the exhaustion of people who'd worked themselves to death. The maintenance lift swayed beside the platform, and according to my watch, it was 2:31 a.m. Rule 3 said not to ride the maintenance lift after 2 a.m., but it didn't say anything about walking past it. I skirted the platform, keeping my eyes on the ground, and tried to find another route to the parking lot. The ghost miners in the roller coaster cars turned their heads to watch me pass. I could feel their attention like weight pressing down on my shoulders, but I kept walking. The protective coal in my pocket pulsed with warmth, creating a barrier between me and their reaching fingers. One of them spoke as I passed, his voice carrying the wheeze of black lung disease. "You're Ezra Lester's great-grandson. He worked Section C until the cave-in of 52. Took our tools when he left. Said he'd bring them back." I didn't respond, didn't look up. Engaging with the ghosts would only give them more power over me. But the voice followed me as I walked away from the platform. "We're still waiting for those tools, boy. Still waiting for what's ours." The path finally straightened, leading toward what looked like the correct direction to the parking lot. But as I walked, I noticed other figures gathering at the edges of my vision. Not just miners, but families from the old company town. Children in patched clothes, women carrying empty lunch pails, old men with the bent backs of surface workers. All of them watching my progress with hungry eyes. They lined the walkway like spectators at a parade, but none of them spoke. They just stared, following my movement with a collective focus that made my skin crawl. The coal in my pocket grew hotter, and I realized it was working overtime to keep them at bay. Near the duck pond shooting gallery, I encountered something that made me stop dead. The mechanical ducks that should have been frozen in place were moving, but not in their normal back-and-forth pattern. Instead, they swam in tight circles, their painted eyes fixed on something behind me. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw a child standing among the ghost spectators, a girl maybe 8 years old, wearing a faded dress and clutching a doll made from mining company rags. She looked familiar, and after a moment, I realized why. She was the spitting image of my cousin Jessa at that age, but with the hollow cheeks and pale skin of malnutrition. When she smiled at me, her teeth were black with coal dust. "Uncle Caleb," she said, her voice carrying across the midway. "Mama says you're supposed to come home now. Daddy's been waiting in the mine shaft since 1952. The girl wasn't real. Couldn't be real. But she looked so much like family that my feet started moving toward her before I caught myself. The coal in my pocket flared with heat, burning through the fabric of my jeans, and the pain snapped me back to reality. I turned away from the child and ran. The parking lot appeared ahead of me like a mirage, my Ford Ranger sitting under the single working streetlight, exactly where I'd left it. But the distance between me and the truck seemed to stretch with each step, like I was running on a treadmill that moved faster than my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear the ghost spectators beginning to move. Not walking. That would have been too normal. Instead, they glided across the ground with the smooth motion of mine carts on rails, their eyes reflecting the streetlight like animal eyes in headlights. The girl who looked like Jessa led the procession, her rag doll bouncing with each stride. "Don't run from family," she called after me. "We just want you to come home." My truck keys felt slippery in my hands, but I managed to get the door unlocked. The interior smelled like cigarettes and fast food, normal scents that belonged to the world outside Ridgeline. I slammed the door and turned the ignition, praying the old Ford would start without its usual 5 minutes of coaxing. The engine turned over on the second try, rumbling to life with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the mountain stillness. Through the windshield, I could see the ghost crowd gathering at the edge of the parking lot, held back by some invisible boundary they couldn't cross. The girl who looked like Jessa pressed her face against that barrier, her features distorting like she was underwater. I put the truck in reverse and backed away from the park entrance, gravel crunching under my tires. The ghosts watched me go, their expressions shifting from hunger to disappointment to something that might have been grief. As I reached the main road and shifted into drive, the girl raised her hand in a small wave goodbye. But just before I turned onto the highway that would take me back to Beckley, I heard something that made my stomach drop. From the direction of the park, carried on the mountain wind, came the sound of carousel music, the fifth song of the night, a song that shouldn't exist according to the rules. I pressed the accelerator to the floor and drove toward town, trying to ignore the sound of Amazing Grace playing at funeral tempo behind me. In my rearview mirror, I could see lights beginning to flicker on throughout Ridgeline, as if the park was waking up for a day that would never come. The debt remained, just as the woman in the funhouse had said. And debts, I was learning, had a way of following you home. The drive back to Beckley should have taken 20 minutes, but the mountain road seemed to stretch and curve in ways I didn't remember from the trip in. Every time I thought I recognized a landmark, the old bridge over Piney Creek, the abandoned gas station with the rusted Sinclair sign, it would shift position or disappear entirely when I tried to focus on it. The radio in my truck had been broken for months, stuck on static, but now it crackled to life with a signal I'd never heard before. Not a commercial station, but something older, broadcasting what sounded like a 1940s radio drama about coal miners trapped underground. The actors spoke with thick Appalachian accents, their voices distorted by decades of transmission through mountain rock. Day 14 in Section C, a man's voice reported. Ezra Lester found another way through the cave-in, but he's keeping it secret. Won't tell the rest of us how he's getting tools and food. Says he's got family to think about. I fumbled for the radio knob to change the station, but it wouldn't budge. The drama continued, and I realized with growing dread that I was listening to events from 1952, broadcast live from some pocket of time that had never escaped the coal seams beneath Ridgeline. Ezra came back today without the tools, another voice said. Claims he lost them, but Jimmy Mullins saw him loading them into his truck. We're all gonna die down here, and Ezra's stealing what might save us. The broadcast cut to static, then resumed with a different voice, younger, more desperate. This is Corey Mullins, great-grandson of Jimmy. If anyone hears this, don't work the night shift at Ridgeline. They're collecting on old debts, and the interest has been building for 70 years. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Corey's voice continued through the radio, explaining what I'd experienced tonight, but from the perspective of someone who hadn't escaped. He described the funhouse transformation, the company storewoman, the choice between joining the miners underground or taking his place as eternal guardian. I thought I could outrun it, Corey's voice said, fading in and out like a weak signal. Made it all the way to Charleston before they found me. The debt follows you wherever you go. Geographic distance doesn't matter when you're dealing with obligations that transcend the physical world. The transmission ended with what sounded like pickaxes striking stone, followed by Corey's scream, cut short by static. I punched the radio off, but it continued broadcasting. The voices now belonged to other security guards from years past, each one describing their encounter with the mining company ghosts, each one explaining how they'd tried to run and failed. My phone, which had shown no signal at the park, now displayed 3 bars and 17 missed calls, all from Jessa. I pulled over at a scenic overlook and dialed her number, needing to hear a living voice from someone who cared about me. Caleb. Thank God. Jessa's voice sounded strained, exhausted. Where are you? I've been calling all night. Driving back from the park. Had to leave early. Jessa, there's something seriously wrong with that place. The rules they gave me, they're not just guidelines. I know, she interrupted. That's why I've been calling. After you left for work tonight, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about great-grandpa Ezra and the stories grandmother used to tell about why he left the mines. So I drove up to the old Mullins place to talk to Jimmy's widow, see if she remembered anything. The overlook where I'd stopped faced the valley where Ridgeline sat hidden among the hills. From this distance, the park looked like a collection of tiny lights. But as I watched, those lights began forming patterns. Not random illumination, but deliberate shapes that spelled out words in the darkness. Debt unpaid. Mrs. Mullins told me things I wish I'd known before I recommended you for that job, Jessa continued. Ezra didn't just take tools from the mine. When the Section C collapse happened, he had information about a safe passage out. Could have saved 12 men, including Jimmy Mullins. But he used that passage for himself and sealed it behind him, thinking nobody would ever know. The lights in the valley shifted, forming new words. Lester owes. The families of those miners never forgot, Jessa said. When the coal company finally abandoned the site, the debts transferred to whatever came next. Ridgeline built their park on top of a mass grave. Caleb. Those 12 miners are still down there, still waiting for justice. I wanted to tell her about the ghost child who looked like her, about the fun house and the company store woman, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched the lights below continue their accusatory display, collection due. Mrs. Mullins said Corey tried to leave town after his first night at the park, Jessa went on. Made it as far as Charleston before he started seeing minors everywhere he went. In his apartment building, at the grocery store, standing in his shower when he got home from work. They followed him for 3 weeks before he couldn't take it anymore and came back to Ridgeline. What happened to him? He made a deal. Took a position as permanent night security in exchange for the ghosts leaving his family alone. Mrs. Mullins said he still calls her sometimes, voice coming through the static on her old radio. Says he's protecting the park, keeping the ghosts contained so they can't spread to the rest of Beckley. The lights in the valley began pulsing, creating a rhythm that matched the beat of my racing heart. I understood now why Corey's uniform had been found folded on the carousel platform. It hadn't been abandoned. It had been passed down, like a torch or a burden. Jessa, I need you to do something for me, I said, backing away from the overlook railing. Go to grandmother's old house and get the coal bucket from her basement, the one with our family name carved in the side. Then meet me at the Tamarack rest stop on I-77. Caleb, what are you planning? Before I could answer, my truck engine died. Not sputtered, not gradually lost power, just stopped completely, like someone had pulled a plug. The headlights went dark, and the only illumination came from the park lights below, which had now formed a single word that filled the entire valley. Return. The truck just died, I told Jessa. I think they're bringing me back whether I want to come or not. Through the windshield, I could see figures approaching from the tree line. Not walking, but gliding across the asphalt with the smooth motion I'd witnessed at the park. Miners in coveralls, women in company store aprons, children with coal-stained faces. They surrounded my truck in a circle, their eyes reflecting the distant park lights like stars. Caleb? Caleb? Talk to me. The ghost child who resembled Jessa appeared at my driver's side window, her rag doll pressed against the glass. Uncle Caleb, she said, her voice muffled but audible through the closed truck. Daddy says it's time to come home. You can't run from family debts. I reached for the piece of coal in my pocket, but my fingers found nothing. Somewhere between the park and the overlook, I'd lost my only protection. The child smiled, revealing those black teeth, and reached through the closed window like it was made of water. Jessa, I said into the phone, my voice steady despite everything. If I don't make it to Tamarack by sunrise, you need to warn people about Ridgeline. Tell them the night security position is a trap. Tell them the rules aren't meant to protect you. They're meant to gradually break down your defenses until you have no choice but to stay. The ghost child's hand touched my arm, and suddenly I understood what Corey had felt during his 3 weeks in Charleston. The cold that seeped through her fingers wasn't just temperature. It was the weight of obligation, the inexorable pull of generational debt that couldn't be paid with money or time. We miss you already, the child said, and my truck engine rumbled back to life. But I wasn't the one who had turned the key. The steering wheel began turning by itself, guiding my truck back toward the road that led to Ridgeline. Through the phone, I could hear Jessa calling my name, but her voice seemed to come from very far away, like she was shouting from the surface while I sank deeper underwater. The last thing I managed to say before the phone went dead was, "Tell them Caleb Lester paid what his family owed." The carousel music stopped, and in the silence that followed, I could hear something rising from the mine shaft. Voices singing a hymn in harmonies that belonged to another century. "Shall We Gather at the River," echoed from underground, performed by a choir that had been practicing the same song for 70 years. "What happened to my great-grandfather?" I asked. "Ezra lived with the guilt until he died in 1987, Corey said. "Cancer, but the kind that comes from breathing too much coal dust. On his deathbed, he told your grandmother about the sealed passage, about the 12 men he could have saved. She tried to make amends by leaving offerings at the old mine entrance, food, flowers, even some of Ezra's personal belongings. But objects can't pay a debt measured in lives." The singing from underground grew louder, and I realized the ghostly miners were ascending the mine shaft tracks, returning from their nightly journey to nowhere. As they reached the surface, I could see them clearly for the first time. 12 men in mining coveralls and helmets, their faces bearing the peaceful expressions of people who had finally stopped struggling against their fate. Jimmy Mullins stepped forward from the group, his lamp casting a circle of yellow light that shouldn't have been possible from equipment that had been broken for decades. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the broad shoulders and scarred hands of someone who'd spent his life working underground. "Caleb Lester," he said, his voice carrying the weight of coal seams. "Your great-grandfather's debt has been transferred to you through blood and lineage. The interest has compounded beyond what money could satisfy. Only service can balance the ledger now." "What kind of service?" "The same choice we offered Corey. Join us in the deep shafts, searching for an exit that no longer exists, or remain on the surface as our guardian. Keep us contained within these boundaries so we can't spread our hunger for justice to the innocent." I looked at Corey, who nodded slowly. "It's not a bad existence," he said, though his hollow eyes suggested otherwise. "The park provides everything you need. Food appears in the concession stands. The security office stays warm in winter. You'll never age beyond what you are right now. The only cost is freedom. And if I refuse..." Jimmy Mullins smiled, revealing teeth stained black with coal dust. "Then we follow you wherever you go, and everyone you care about becomes collateral in a debt that was never theirs to begin with. We'll appear to Jessa at her job, to your mother when she's driving, to children in your family who haven't even been born yet. The debt will spread like black lung through your bloodline, until someone finally accepts responsibility." The other 11 miners stood behind Jimmy, their helmet lamps creating a semicircle of light that reminded me of halos. But these weren't angels. They were men who had died because of my family's selfishness, and their patience had finally reached its end. "Ezra could have saved us," one of them said. "Instead, he chose his own survival and sealed our tomb." That choice echoes through generations until someone pays what was owed. I thought about Jessa driving through the mountains with grandmother's coal bucket, probably already halfway to the Tamarack rest stop where I'd never meet her. I thought about my mother in Charleston, unaware that her father's father had doomed us all with a decision made in darkness and desperation. I thought about future Lesters who might inherit this burden if I ran. "If I stay," I said, "if I take Corey's place, does the debt end with me?" "The debt ends when justice is served," Jimmy replied. "Your service would satisfy the obligation, but only if freely given. A choice made under threat carries no value." Corey stepped closer, and I could see the resignation in his eyes. "It's not freedom, Caleb, but it's not torture either. The work has meaning. We're keeping something contained, but could destroy families throughout West Virginia. That's worth something." The carousel began turning again, its painted horses carrying invisible children on rides that would never end. The Thunderbolt's mine shaft tracks gleamed in the helmet lamp light, ready for another descent into futile hope. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear the fifth song playing on endless repeat. Amazing Grace. At a tempo that suggested grace was something that had to be earned through suffering. I pulled out my truck keys and looked at them for a long moment, then tossed them to Corey. "Tell Jessa I kept my promise," I said. "Tell her Caleb Lester paid what his family owed." The transfer of guardianship happened without ceremony, like changing shifts at any other job. Jimmy Mullins produced a ledger bound in cracked leather, its pages filled with entries dating back to the mime's opening in 1923. He turned to a fresh page and wrote my name in careful script, then handed me a fountain pen that felt warm with recent use. "Sign here," he said, pointing to a line beneath today's date. "This makes it official in the company records." I signed Caleb Lester in handwriting that looked steadier than I felt. The moment the ink touched paper, something shifted in the air around us. A settling, like dust falling after a minor cave-in. The weight I'd been carrying since the fourth carousel song lifted from my shoulders, but it was replaced by something heavier. Responsibility that stretched into an indefinite future. Corey stepped forward as I handed back the pen, and for the first time since I'd met him, he smiled. Not the hollow expression of someone enduring endless duty, but genuine relief. "It's done," he said, more to himself than to me. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. I can finally go home. "What happens to you now?" I asked. "I get to live again," Corey replied, pulling off his worn security uniform shirt. Beneath it, he wore a plain white t-shirt that looked like it had been waiting in his truck since the night he'd first accepted this position. "The contract ends when someone takes your place. I can go back to Charleston, find a real job, maybe even call that girl who worked at the coffee shop near my apartment." Jimmy Mullins closed the ledger with a snap that echoed across the transformed midway. "The debt is satisfied by willing service," he explained. "Corey Mullins has paid what his family owed through guardianship. He's free to resume his life, with our gratitude and a promise that no Mullins descendant will be troubled by mining company ghosts." The other 11 miners began dispersing across the park, taking up positions near rides and attractions that had resumed their normal appearance. The duck pond shooting gallery was once again a carnival game, though the mechanical ducks now moved with purpose that suggested intelligence behind their painted eyes. The Thunderbolt had returned to its surface configuration, but I could see the mine shaft entrance still visible beneath the loading platform, like a double exposure photograph. "Your duties are simple," Jimmy continued, handing me a new set of rules written on paper that looked identical to the original list I'd carried in my pocket. "Maintain the boundaries. Keep us contained within the park limits. Ensure that visitors during operating hours see only what they expect to see: rides, games, and family entertainment." I unfolded the new rules and read through them by the light of the miners' helmet lamps. Ridgeline Guardian Protocols. Rule 1. Walk the perimeter each night at sunset and sunrise. The boundary markers must remain undisturbed. Rule 2. Monitor the mine shaft entrance beneath the Thunderbolt. If the descent track extends beyond normal parameters, activate the containment protocol. Rule 3. During operating hours, maintain the illusion of a normal amusement park. Visitors must not witness company town manifestations. Rule 4. The 12 miners will test the boundaries once per month. Guide them back if they stray too close to the park limits. Rule 5. New security guards may be hired for day shifts only. Night security is a permanent position held by the current guardian. Rule 6. Family members of previous mining company employees may experience increased sensitivity to ghostly manifestations. Monitor them carefully. Rule 7. If the carousel plays more than 3 songs in a single night, begin evacuation protocols for any living personnel on the grounds. The rules were more detailed than what I'd received as a regular security guard, but they made sense now that I understood my real purpose. I wasn't just a watchman, I was a keeper of boundaries, ensuring that 70 years of accumulated supernatural energy stayed contained within Ridgeline's borders. "The park provides for its guardian," Jimmy said, gesturing toward the security office. "Food appears in the refrigerator, clothing in the closet, and basic amenities are maintained through company resources. You'll age at roughly 1/10 the normal rate, so time passes differently here than in the outside world." That explained why Corey looked older than his chronological age, but not by the full 2 years he'd served. For him, the experience had lasted about 3 months of subjective time. I could handle that ratio, especially knowing it wasn't a life sentence, but a debt payment with a clear end point. "How will I know when someone comes to replace me?" I asked. "The same way Corey knew you were coming," Jimmy replied. "Family debts create their own gravity. When a Lester descendant is ready to take responsibility, they'll be drawn here by circumstances that seem like coincidence. Your cousin Jessa might recommend the job to her son in 20 years, or a future great-nephew might need work after losing a construction job in Charleston." Corey finished changing into his civilian clothes and walked toward the parking lot where my truck now sat next to his own vehicle, a rusted Chevy that had been waiting for his return. "I'll tell Jessa you kept your word," he said, "and I'll make sure people know not to take the night security position here. Can't stop the cycle completely, but I can slow it down." He paused at the edge of the midway and looked back at the carousel, which had begun playing its first song of the new shift. The entertainer, at normal speed, cheerful and welcoming. "It's not a bad place, Caleb. During the day when families are here, you can almost forget what lies underneath. Kids laugh on the rides, parents win stuffed animals, teenagers hold hands by the duck pond. There's real joy here, even with all the history." I watched Corey drive away, his taillights disappearing around the first bend in the mountain road. Then I was alone with the miners, who had begun their eternal routines of maintaining equipment and preparing for another day of serving families who would never know about the company town spirits working to make their visits memorable. Jimmy Mowens approached me one last time, his helmet lamp dimmed to a comfortable glow. "Your great-grandfather wasn't a bad man," he said. "Frightened, desperate, thinking only of survival. We don't hate him for the choice he made. But debts have their own logic, and some obligations can only be satisfied through generations." "Will I remember my life before this?" I asked. "Everything. The memories are part of the service. You'll remember Jessa, your mother, the construction job that brought you here. That connection to the living world is what makes you effective as a guardian. Pure spirits like us can only interact with other ghosts. We need someone with roots in both worlds." The sun was beginning to rise behind the eastern ridgeline, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of the company town photographs in the Beckley exhibition coal mine. Soon, the day shift workers would arrive to prepare for another day of operation. Families would drive up from Charleston and Parkersburg, seeking a few hours of innocent entertainment in the mountains. And I would make sure that's exactly what they found. The hardest part about being a guardian isn't the isolation or the supernatural responsibility. It's watching families enjoy themselves while knowing what lies beneath their feet. A father wins a stuffed elephant at the rain toss, and I remember that the same booth was once a mining office where shift schedules were posted next to black-bordered death notices. Children squeal with delight on the Thunderbolt, unaware that the track's foundation rests on the sealed entrance to Section C, where 12 men spent their final days hoping for rescue that never came. But there's beauty in the contradiction. During daylight hours, Ridgeline serves its intended purpose, creating memories for families who drive up from the valleys, seeking a few hours of mountain air and carnival magic. I've learned to find satisfaction in maintaining that illusion, ensuring that a 3-year-old's first carousel ride remains untainted by the knowledge that the painted horses sometimes move without power, breathing with the rhythm of animals that died before her grandparents were born. The miners have adapted to our arrangement with surprising grace. Jimmy Mullins operates the Thunderbolt during busy weekends, his steady hands ensuring safety systems function perfectly. The other 11 take turns running game booths and concession stands, their presence adding an old-fashioned courtesy that visitors often comment on. Such polite workers, mothers tell each other, while their children win prizes at games that never seem quite as rigged as similar attractions at other parks. Night shifts follow their own rhythm. I walk the perimeter at sunset and sunrise, checking boundary markers that look like ordinary fence posts, but serve as supernatural anchors. The markers hold concentrations of coal from the original mine, blessed by mountain preachers, whose congregations included families of the dead miners. As long as the markers remain undisturbed, the company town manifestations stay contained within park limits. The monthly boundary tests require more active management. Jimmy and his crew walk the fence line, probing for weak spots where their essence might leak into the surrounding forest. I guide them back when they stray too close to the edges, using techniques Corey taught me during our brief overlap period. The key is respect rather than authority. These men died because someone they trusted betrayed them, so commands carry less weight than honest conversation. Family news reaches me through channels I hadn't expected. Jessa visits every few weeks, always during daylight hours, bringing updates from the world beyond Ridgeline. She works for the county tourism board now, promoting legitimate attractions while quietly discouraging people from seeking night security positions at remote locations. My mother believes I found steady work in North Carolina and sends postcards to a Charleston post office box that Corey maintains as part of his new life. The arrangement suits everyone involved. Corey married the coffee shop girl and manages a small construction company that specializes in historic preservation. The 12 miners have found purpose in protecting the families who visit their resting place. And I've discovered that paying generational debts can be deeply satisfying work, even when the payment stretches across years rather than days. New applicants still inquire about night security positions, drawn by forces they don't understand. I interview them carefully, looking for signs of ancestral obligation or simple desperation that might make them vulnerable to supernatural contracts. Most I turn away with stories about budget cuts and liability concerns. But occasionally, someone arrives whose last name appears in the old company records, whose family tree includes branches that touch the mining operation that once stood here. When that happens, I provide honest employment, day shifts only, competitive wages, no mysterious rules or supernatural encounters. Because the debt my family owed has been paid in full, and I intend to ensure future generations inherit stories rather than obligations.